Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, live inside the Beltway, talking with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. That music always means we're in the last radio hour of the week on Friday morning. And so I'm so glad to welcome back Dr. Arnn, who's been under the weather for a couple of weeks. I hope you are recuperating well, Dr. Arnn.
Yeah. Nothing like a break from the radio to make you feel strong.
That's not what it was. That's a terrible thing to say. But I don't see you, so I gather you can see me. I hope you can at least. There you are. Did your illness have anything to do with your granddaughter? Because I've been put under the weather by my granddaughter this week.
I got, so our younger daughter got married in San Antonio, and the English, as we refer to my in-laws, brought a foreign bug. So it was an invasion from abroad. And I don't get sick very often. And this was a bad bug. And
I don't
10
either.
days.
I do not either. But boy, oh boy, I blame grandchildren before I blame in-laws because, you got to deal with those in-laws for a while.
It's, by the way, both my daughters are married. I've paid that bill.
Congratulations. I only had one. And I'm letting the second son get married in 2 weeks, and then that one's off my radar as well. We are successfully and well and truly done. Dr. Arnn, someone who is done this week is a friend of yours, a friend of mine, Kevin McCarthy. We have been friends, you and I, for more than 30 years, and both of us have been friends with Kevin McCarthy for the same amount of time. This is truly a tragedy. What is your commentary on it?
Well, the government is dysfunctional as a rule. Widely. And the Republican Party is extensively dysfunctional. But if you just look at the facts, those 6 or 8 guys didn't topple Kevin McCarthy. The Democratic Party did. Those 6 or 8 guys helped him. And it's too bad because, if we've been talking about Churchill and the world crisis, and the First World War opens with Britain deeply distracted by fundamental problems with Ireland. And they were able to overcome that enough to focus on the war. Can we focus on our big problems now? Because it's, the House right now, as we speak, the House is not functioning. And, it's sometimes you can say it would be good if the government didn't function. But the truth of the matter is, the most powerful parts of the government in this new age, the permanent bureaucracy, they're functioning all the time. And how do you get a plan to get the expenses and revenues of the government of the United States under control, to get the private sector protected so we can live our lives as free people, which is the purpose of the country? And how do you figure out about this big war we got going on and how you bring it to an end somehow with some good resolution? And those are huge things going on right now. And we're not talking about those.
I'm in Switzerland as you are. Hillsdale's nonpartisan, and I am a Republican partisan who stays in Switzerland. So we were both in Switzerland together. But I've had all the candidates on, most recently Governor Ron DeSantis on Wednesday of this week. And we talked seriously about China and Russia and Iran. He's a serious guy, and he just made an appeal for people to understand the folks who run those regimes are not susceptible to reason. It's kind of what Churchill did through the entire 30s, was beg the British public to understand that Hitler was not susceptible to reason. And they resisted learning that until the bombs started falling, Dr. Arnn. Is that what it's going to take in the United States?
Yeah, well, what will work? We don't know right now. Nothing works right now. I mean, look, we are not policing much of America. And criminals are running rampant. I mean, they go in shops and they take stuff at will. And they know they won't be prosecuted. Or if they are, they'll be let right out of jail. So there's dysfunction everywhere. And, forget Democratic versus Republican. The hope that there could be some serious policy would have to involve large segments of both parties. Well, right now, with the House not operating, Washington, D.C. is a one-party state. And you live in one, and well, yeah, you do. You live in D.C. and California, and Michigan has become a one-party state. And that means that they're not discussing anything seriously. They're just doing what they believe, and it's all on one side.
I actually live in Virginia now, and I want to tell you something I think is good news. There's a governor here who is focused on one thing, elementary and secondary education, and that's what he talks about every day, and it works. It has worked. I think unless these 10 knucklehead Republicans screw up the narrative, he was going to win the state Senate too, and then we could lower taxes, but he stayed relentlessly focused on education. What lesson does that give you? We're gone from a blue to a purple state, and we're on our way to being a red state again because of Glenn Youngkin. What's that tell you?
Well, he's a genius. And, I think, first of all, if the greatness of America is gone, Lord help the world. And I think it's not gone. And the most encouraging thing is that the largest exodus from public education that I can find in American history is in the last 6 years. And the schools, here are the numbers. Since 2000, according to the Department of Education, for goodness sake, since 2000, the number of students has increased 7.5%, and the number of teachers has increased 8.5%, and the number of administrators has increased 92%. And what do the administrators do? Well, first of all, they don't go in classrooms. They write rules, and rules teachers are supposed to follow. And they're complicated, and they're often insane. And if parents object to them, they have custody threatened of their children. And there's an exodus going. And, Hillsdale College has suffered the terrible misfortune of becoming important. And so now lots of people pay attention to us who didn't used to. I wish they wouldn't. But this school thing is one of the things, because we've started about 100 charter schools, about to pass that number. And they're all over the country, and they're rolling. And it's complicated to start a charter school, but people are taking the trouble, and we're helping them.
Dr. Arnn, you can go back and read the interview with Governor DeSantis if you'd like. It's over at HughHewitt.com. He's sua sponte, and I got to explain that for the Pittsburgh Steelers fan. That means I had nothing to do with it. It was of his own initiation. Brought up Hillsdale College as a model for how to run institutions like his new college. And the key part of what we were talking about is that teachers' unions are the enemy of excellence, and that tenure is the engine of teachers' unions. Do you agree with that?
Well, that's right. You can make just about anything work if this simple thing is followed. The way to raise children is to depend upon the natural love that parents have for children. And so they should be strong in the system. They shouldn't run the system, but they should be strong in the system because they want what's good for their kids on the average, and more than any other body of people you can identify, certainly more than a bureaucracy that doesn't know who the kids are. And so remember, America was a bottom-up country for most of its history. And now it's rules made at the center. And because they pretend to comprehend everything, they have to be hopelessly complex. And nobody can read them. Nobody ever does read them, by the way. And so there's your difficulty. And so you've got what Glenn Youngkin is great and Ron DeSantis is great, as both of them, especially on this issue. Because what they did was they got a system where the parents could be strong in the schools again. And that just works them back towards sanity. Remember, the rebellion against the public schools became a national issue through Loudoun County, Virginia. And you live in that county? That's close to D.C. It's full of bureaucrats.
Yeah,
it's
I don't, but I'm in a worse county with a worse school board, but it's a pretty bad school board in Loudoun County.
Yeah, and so these parents, and then, they put the FBI on them. And so. We're
going to come back and talk about that. Because we also talked about, with Governor DeSantis and every other Republican, politicization of the Department of Justice, which is a menace to free society. When you have the internal engines of investigation turned against political opponents, we're in a bad spot, and that's where we are. Stay tuned, America. Dr. Larry Arnn will be right back. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu.
Hey, folks, it's Scott Bertram, director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. I wanted to take some time to say thank you. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. We're working hard here to bring you the good, the true, and the beautiful in audio form, and we couldn't do it without someone very important. That someone is you, of course. Hillsdale reaches and teaches millions of people through its free online courses and in Primus and, podcasts like this one. But without you, none of that is possible. Your support is essential to the pursuit of truth and the defense of liberty. The more you listen, the more this work thrives. So thank you again for listening, and God bless you and your family.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway, the last radio hour of the week. Everything Hillsdale can be found at hillsdale.edu. Dr. Larry Arnn is my guest, president of Hillsdale College. He is overwhelmed in applications, but I would still encourage everyone out there, get in line, try and get in, do the best you can. And if you can't get in, go to some other school and watch the video courses, which are all available over there, because that way at least you won't end up indoctrinated. Dr. Arnn, I want to talk to you for a moment about the trial of Donald Trump in New York that's underway. This is the biggest sham I have seen in a courtroom in a long time. There is no victim alleged. No bank has filed a complaint about Donald Trump's valuation of his property. Valuation is a difficult thing. I represented landowners for 30 years. You were at my side in some of those battles. You know that you cannot value property unless you look at comps and future expectation of growth. They have him in the dock. He's there every day. They put a gag rule on him. This I did not expect in America in 2023. What do you think?
Well, that's dysfunction again. See, when I worry about these things, what I think is there are massive challenges, among the worst in modern times, and the country is not working properly. And what I mean by that is the people ought to get to pick the president of the United States, and they did in 2020 under election that was much altered in its mechanism. But now he's the front runner on the Republican side for 2024, and he's being prosecuted in many jurisdictions. And what is there to those prosecutions? This one is particularly ridiculous, but, this insurrection he's supposed to have led, the one thing he said on January the 6th is proceed peacefully, right? And that's, and it now appears to be true, that he offered the National Guard to the Congress, to Nancy Pelosi, and she turned him down.
What's interesting about that, Dr. Arnn, for the benefit of the Steelers fans again, he has not been charged in complicity with the January 6th riot in the Capitol, because there was no way to do so, for the reason you just cited. They charge him with conspiracy to obstruct a proceeding, which is exactly what the Democrats did in 2000 and 2016, and I believe in 2004, exactly the same. And he's getting charged with it. There is, of the 91 counts, a couple of counts which are serious, obstruction counts. And I haven't heard his defense, so I can't validate it. But I have heard the prosecution on all the other stuff, and it's nonsense. But the trial we're talking about right now is a civil trial in New York in front of a judge. It is astonishing to me that this is happening. Yeah.
And that, partly, I don't think that those Republicans who joined the Democrats to oust the speaker did the right thing. And partly, it's such a consequential thing and such an unprecedented thing. And the overwhelming majority of their caucus did not agree with them. And, I have certain barometers in the Congress. I don't follow the Congress all the time because I have a real job. But I know Tom McClintock very well.
Yes.
And very well. And I know Thomas Massey from Kentucky well. And they didn't vote for this. And that tells me something, right? And those guys are very firm people of principle. And so the thing is, that's the same thing. It disrupts the functioning of the House of Representatives. And what theme can be emerged from this? Who knows? Who knows? But the same thing in New York, right? A local prosecutor bringing the Republican frontrunner into campus on a tortured lawsuit. People used to say, no. People in the government used to say, the people are busy deciding that one. We should stay away. And that's a better attitude. It's not true in all cases, but it's better.
And this is not to paper over, and indeed we will be talking about Ukraine after the break. There are deep divisions in the Republican Party, but the way to solve them is never to have a coup with the Democrats. I mean, it's never happened before. We have a pretty old republic. It's 230 years old. It's never happened before. Is this an omen that the Republican Party is shuddering, Dr. Arnn?
Yeah, well, sometimes I fear my former words, but I've been saying for 5 or 6 years now that this reminds me of the 1850s. And, a party was breaking up, another was, that's very rare in American history, right? There have been, 4 political parties of national scope in American history. And one of them was dying, and the one that elected Abraham Lincoln president was being born. Well, of course, that was very doubtful at every moment. But it's not functioning very well right now. And see, its job, the other thing about it is the hallmark. James Madison says the most important thing about the Constitution is the structure that it provides. And what is the structure? What does that mean? That means power flows from the people, directly from the people, in different ways to different bodies, and it makes them equal. And the national elected bodies are 3, the Senate and the House and the President. And they're divided right now. And that means you start out by knowing you can't run policy. But if you don't like the Ukraine policy, work to get it moderated.
That's it. We're going to come back to that. Don't go anywhere, America. Dr. Larry Arnn is my guest as we look back at an astonishing week in American political history. I'm Hugh Hewitt, Dr. Arnn, Hillsdale College. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Dr. Larry Arnn is president of Hillsdale College. He joins me for the Hillsdale Dialogue this week, a very consequential week in American history because it's never happened before, where a speaker has been dethroned by his own caucus joining with the other party. And it's one of those signals that normally goes up when a realignment is happening. And I have been reading Steve Inskeep's new book on Lincoln, Differ We Must. It's very interesting because I never paid much attention to Lincoln, the Whig years in Illinois, and how the Whigs broke up over the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And he ended up moderating, and the abolitionist absolutists came and met him halfway, and they agreed on, we shall stand against the extension of slavery in the territories, and the Republican Party was born. I don't know what is dividing the Republican Party now. It's not Ukraine, although that is one issue that divides the Republican Party. It's different. It's actually every man and woman for himself, Dr. Arnn. And I don't know that any political party can survive that when they haven't got internal structure like the teachers union to control them and tell them what to do.
Yeah. And, there are these enormous forces in American politics now, and they're in the regulatory state, and they're united with the public employee unions, and, they're in close contact with them. And there's the university and especially the fancy ones, right? And there's the media and big corporations, right? Those are awesome forces, right? And they, in general, are disposed in the same direction. And in general, it's just a fact, ordinary people are disposed in a different direction. who's going to represent those ordinary people? How do you marshal those people in sufficient numbers to put a check on the direction the country is going, which is debt and ever more expenditure, and soon to follow ever more taxes and less provision? You know, our friend Tom Tate, who is an awesome mayor of Anaheim, he was very effective, and he simplified. He said, "Our purpose in the government of Anaheim is safe, clean, and well maintained," right? And then the list is over, right? Those are the things that are not being cared for. And so how can you make an issue of that? Because I am confident that the majority of people will vote for that. And that's what we need. We need a party that can marshal support and constitute a serious alternative to the direction of things. And now, that's hard, right?
The advantage that Lincoln had when the Republican Party was aborting is that we were not threatened externally. We were not in any way threatened with Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin or the mullahs in Tehran. We also have to have a foreign policy at the same time. How do you think they ought to describe that foreign policy?
Well, at the higher level of generality, that's not difficult. The purpose of the foreign policy of the United States is to protect the people and nation of the United States. So you always start with that. That's the highest order thing. The second order thing is we need to preserve a liberal society. That means people are free. That means they have their own resources in their own pockets, and they earn them and they get to deploy them, which is the condition of living an independent and fully human life. They should raise their own children. They should have their own homes. That's the object. And remember, the United States is the first nation in history founded with the idea that everyone should have that. You see, never before and never so greatly since. So there. Now, that's our first and our second thing. And that means that we need to run an economical, a strategically wise foreign policy. And in this age of modern weapons and science and instant communication, we have one example about how to do that. And the one great example, right? The greatest statesman in the 20th century is Winston Churchill. And he confronted precisely the kinds of problems that we face today. And he wrote a lot and said a lot. It's endless, right? And so you can't just do what he said because he's been dead for how long? For
63
years
right?
plus.
Yeah.
But what you could do is study and think. And like one of the things that I've advocated now for 30 years, sometimes in vain, is that whatever we do in foreign policy, we should always look at the cost. We should have a strategy to achieve what we need in a way that makes us stronger when it's over and doesn't break the bank, right? Because, trillions in the Middle East, and what have we done there? We have not really founded a stable democracy anywhere in the Middle East, except the one that founded itself, Israel. And so was that wise? Shouldn't we think of something to do that's more economical? We have a lot of force in Qatar and states like that. That looks pretty efficient to me. They're welcome there. They're not under constant threat. They can get around pretty quick all over that very close and very dangerous place. But going to Afghan villages and turning them into democracies, I didn't think that would work. And,
earlier this week, I had dinner with a Marine field grade officer. So not a junior officer and not a general officer, in between. The ranks that are in between. Major, lieutenant colonel, colonel, those are field officers. And this Marine Corps officer told me, and he had been in Helmand. So he had been in the roughest part of the Wild West with his people in charge of a platoon. And he told me that he despaired of having strategic guidance from the Central. And that over the last year, he wasn't in Kabul when Kabul fell, there was no one in charge. And there was no plan. And so what you get when you have no one in charge and no plan is what we got in Afghanistan, collapse. I don't know who can fix that. The warriors are great. The Marine Corps is still the Marine Corps. But you can't put in what God left out, which is strategery.
Yeah, there you go. And see, I think, so I miss Donald Rumsfeld. Let's pine for the past for a minute. I knew him well for a long time, admired him very much. And I am confident, because of conversations I had with him, that his plan in Afghanistan was to go topple those guys who planned the 9/11 attacks on Afghan soil, the ones who hosted Osama and his friends to be at peace and training in Afghanistan, to go topple them. And his plan for doing that was, they've got enemies all over the country. Just reinforce them a little bit. And so he had a light idea, right? And that was a runaway success. But then we decided to stay and police the place. And I don't know. It's a known fact that it didn't work.
Did it not work? My Marine friend said it would have been strategic to grab Kabul and Bagram and build a force around the strategic center of the country and let the rest of them shoot it out in the wildlands. Because we were never, he said, you define a border, it's not really a border, it's a line on the map, and you say we won't go any further. And you know what they call the territory on the other side? The ungoverned territory of Pakistan. They're admitting that we're just out in the middle of nowhere with no one, and we're trying to say there's a border here. It was remarkably clarifying for me last night, Dr. Arnn.
It will be like, by the way, you know, if the wise policy of Hugh Hewitt and Larry Arnn is put into place tomorrow, it will still be very complicated and difficult. And if you doubt
you're
that,
adding the Arnn part in there. If it was just me, it would be fine. But if you're going to come along and get philosophical,
so Winston Churchill wrote his first book about fighting in Afghanistan. And the last chapter is called The Riddle of the Frontier. And the problem was that India was, by the way, I'm going to India soon.
Hold that thought. I want you to make this a coherent. We're going to go to break and come right back. I want to know what The Riddle of the Frontier is, because that's the book we're not studying. Next week, we'll be back in the world crisis, but we're not going to get to the, it's not the Malacan Field Force, is it? I don't know. I'll ask him after the break. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. I'll be right back with Dr. Arnn.
Hello, this is Kyle Mernon, Director of Online Learning here at Hillsdale College. And I'm excited to announce that we've brought Hillsdale's popular and free online courses to the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. And we're starting with one of my favorites, The Second World Wars, a course taught by Victor Davis Hanson and Hillsdale President Larry P. Arnn. After listening to all 8 episodes, you'll have a clear picture of why the war was fought and how the Allied powers ultimately triumphed. The Hillsdale College Online Courses podcast, which I co-host with my colleague here, Juan Davalos, pursues Hillsdale's mission to provide all who wish to learn the education necessary to preserve the civil and religious liberties of America. And we want you to be a part of it at podcast.hillsdale.edu. Subscribe now to the Hillsdale College Online Courses podcast to hear new episodes every week with additional commentary and insights from our team. Go to podcast.hillsdale.edu to learn more. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu. Thanks for listening.
Welcome back, America. I'm talking with Dr. Larry Arnn at Hillsdale College. What book are we talking about, The Riddle of the Frontier? Is that the Malacan Field Force?
That's right. Last chapter. And here's the story. So Britain has an empire in India. It's huge. It's lightly policed. It's mostly Pacific. But then just north, up in the mountains, impassable almost, is Afghanistan. And so the Afghans are warlike people, and they live in their villages, and once in a while they live their lives, and they farm, and they raise animals and stuff. And then once in a while they get all fired up, and they go across the border, and they raid into India and steal stuff and kill people. And so what are you going to do about that? And the problems are what you learn in the chapter is they're never going to go away. Because first of all, if what you try to do is try to defend that long, rocky, mountainous border, you'll have to have so many troops up there, by the way, not living their lives, not being in their village. They're on post up there, and it's expensive, And you never know where they're going to attack, and you'll always be weaker at any particular point. So that doesn't work. And so then they adopt what Churchill took part in, his first fighting. Butcher and bolt. If they come over and raid, we're going to go over there and kill a bunch of them. And that's what Churchill did. And that was not a satisfactory policy. And so then they decided that they would go up and take the mountain passes and hold them and keep them from coming over. Well, then you got a bunch of troops stationed way up high in the mountains where it's cold as the dickens and hard to resupply them. And then they decide they're going to go over the mountain down to the bottom and hold that. It's called the forward policy. And of course, now they're over the mountain, you know. And so the point was the riddle. There was not a good thing to do except suffer. And Churchill roughly but not strongly supports the forward policy, but he admits that it's going to be a mess. And is it an abidable mess? And, you know, if you admit, as I do, that we need to be involved in the Middle East, what we're really doing is admitting to ourselves that we're not going to turn it into, what, Montana, or pick a desert state, Nevada. It's going to be a mess. You should do the cheapest mess you can that secures what we need there. And you shouldn't define that too broadly. It's my opinion. And, you know, remember, we're $33 trillion in debt now. And that's debt that's accumulated because of the ordinary ongoing profligacy of the government. Or you can put it in non-partisan, to name the other argument, because of the selfishness of the American people who won't pay their taxes or enough taxes.
I reject that. I know you do as well. But I do think, I want to close back where we began on the coup against Kevin McCarthy this week. Wreckers don't build anything, Dr. Arnn. I'm sure you've had wreckers at Hillsdale College over the years that you've been the leader. You can't do anything with a wrecker, expel them, can you? Can you ever reform them?
No. Well, I don't know. It depends on the wrecker, I guess. And see, I don't know any of those people who joined the Democrats in overturning the speaker.
Neither do I.
And I'm not the world's leading expert on this thing either. I'm just saying, wouldn't it be better? What we need is a plan that will work to get us out of this mess. Somebody's got to articulate the plan. And the presidential campaigns are interesting to me because they're talking about more fundamental stuff now. Many of them are. They're talking about the wastefulness and the unaccountable power of the bureaucracy. And remember, if you study politics in the traditional way, in the classic way, here's what you think. What you need to know about a country to analyze it is who rules in virtue of what principle and how do they go about it? And there in American history, they're in running side by side right now. There are two alternative sets of answers to that question. There's the bottom-up election, much as possible done locally. People have to run their own lives, America. Separation of powers so that you do have a powerful federal government. It's accountable to the people and the powers in it are divided. That's one way. The other way is experts, permanent officials with tenure, taking testimony from scientifically competent people is the claim, and making rules that are complex that nobody reads and nobody understands. And that's a way. Right. And the centralization of things is characteristic of the new kind of politics, and the localization of things is characteristic of the old kind.
And we want to go back to the old kind. And next week, we're going to go back to an old book. We're going to be back on the world crisis next week. I think it is going to be Chapter 8, Ireland and the European Balance, for those of you who are keeping up with our reading. Come back and join us next week. Dr. Larry Arnn, President of Hillsdale College. Thank you. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All the Hillsdale Dialogues are there, all the video courses, and Imprimis. Sign up for that. And be back next week for the next Hillsdale Dialogue.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.